So thank you for joining us tonight. This meeting tonight to talk about the parking pilot proposal is a follow-up from the stakeholder outreach that we began on November 27th, and that included all of your feedback here at this meeting at the school, as well as your online comments. We met with the Transportation Commission on January 8th and actually finalized this proposal that we're presenting to you tonight. So for the agenda tonight, we're going to talk about the proposed pilot area, and we're going to talk about the proposed changes to the parking rules, and then we'll open it up to public comment, for which will be limited to 3 minutes to talk about this subject regarding this proposed pilot program. So the study area, as we've discussed before, would include the permit areas for Y2, Y3, and Y4, and that includes the streets between Harlem to Oak Park and South Boulevard to Harrison. So what you see up here is a summary of all of the on-street regulations, and don't worry about it. We're going to dig in and find your finer granular details so that way you can actually see all of the information close up. So first thing we're going to do is talk about on-street, basically the paid parking spaces where you have parking meters or pay by space or pay by license plate. As you can see, between 6 a.m. and 8 a.m., there's no change to the current restriction. There's unrestricted parking between 6 and 8 a.m., and that is not proposed to be changed. Between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., we are proposing introducing what's called dynamic pricing. This enables you as a visitor or a consumer to actually park and stay beyond the current time limits. And what you would end up doing is actually paying a premium or an escalated hourly rate to be able to stay at that meter location for longer. So in some cases, you actually could park at a parking meter or parking space between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. However, you will pay a premium for that particular location. Between 8 p.m. and 3 a.m., the rules would be unrestricted just as they are today, and there's no cost to park during those time frames. Between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m., in order to park in one of the parking meter spaces, you would have to have a registered guest pass or a registered parking permit. This is consistent with the overnight parking ban, so that again, in order to park on street, you would have to have a registered parking permit or parking pass. And in this particular case, we're just opening up the parking metered spaces in order to provide more available parking for your residential parking needs. On Sundays, the parking would remain unrestricted, so starting at 6 a.m. on Sunday morning through Monday at 3 a.m., there would be no cost to park and no time limits. Now let's talk about the on-street daytime restrictions. If your current street is in the pilot area and you don't have a current parking regulation, there would be no policy change to that location. Now, if you do have any time restrictions on your street in the pilot area for daytime, we would like to standardize that time restriction so that there would be no parking between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. However, if you have a registered pass or a registered parking permit, you would be allowed to park in that location. You would not have to move your car between 8 and 10 a.m. However, you would be required to move your vehicle if there was a posted restriction for street sweeping or leaf removal, etc. So that's something that's very important to understand. Now for on-street, for the daytime restrictions, we are talking about having a 3-hour parking time limit between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. so that you can have your visitors that are allowed to park there for a 3-hour time limit, basically Monday through Saturday. Any car that has a valid parking pass or valid permit, you would not have any restrictions for time parking unless, again, the sign posts otherwise. And again, you also have to legally park. You can't block a driveway, you can't park in front of a fire hydrant or anything like that. That's very important to please take note of. The parking pass is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. Also for on-street, let's talk about the permit and parking pass parking between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. Basically, your streets, if you currently are in one of the permitted areas, you would be allowed to park on that street in the pilot area with a valid parking permit or parking pass. And again, the only exceptions to that would be locations that have signs otherwise restricting parking. For example, for street cleaning, street sweeping, whatever the case may be, that's something that's very important. And you can't violate the rules again by blocking a fire hydrant or parking in front of a red curb. Same goes for the existing pass spaces, is that between 8 p.m. and 11 p.m., it's unrestricted parking in those locations, and after 11 p.m., you would be required to have an overnight pass to park on any non-permitted side street. And again, you are not exempt from no parking zones like red curbs or fire hydrant locations, and permit parking would be added to every street in the pilot area. But I must emphasize again that only registered vehicles with valid passes or valid permits would be allowed to park in those locations. And important is that every street would have a designated day of the week where there would be a no parking restriction to provide street maintenance, cleaning support services, tree trimming, cleaning the catch basins, and that would be the requirement that no parking permit or pass would be valid during this posted regulation. Now, it has been requested that people would be allowed to purchase additional permits. Right now, we are anticipating that additional permits would be potentially available. However, there is a consideration that second vehicle permits would simply be priced at a higher rate in order to accommodate the need and the demand. Now let's talk about off-street parking and how the rules apply to off-street parking. Currently, if it's unrestricted, it remains the same. Just like on-street, if there's no policy there today, there would not be a change to that particular location. For the time limits, any parking lot or enclave in the pilot area that has a time restriction, again, we would look to standardize the no parking regulation so that you wouldn't be allowed to park there between 8 to 10 a.m. And again, this is really to address the issue of commuters to try to prevent them from parking in our neighborhoods. And that if you do have a registered pass or a permit, you would be able to park without time limitations or time restrictions, again, barring any signage or rules regarding red curbs or fire hydrants. Now, for the existing permit spaces, there's no plan at this point to change. It will remain as is, and that staff will continue to review this in the future. So currently an existing permit space could be a 24-hour spot, it could be a day or night pass, and right now the current locations will be evaluated by staff using the transportation guidelines to determine how these spaces can be allocated in the future. So now we're going to open it up to public comment. I do want to reemphasize the fact that the public comment needs to be focused on the parking pilot project topics that we just discussed, and you will be limited to 3 minutes per person to share your